How's it going, everybody? How are you? Good morning. So that was a fantastic presentation by Jennifer. Thank you very much. We are going to talk about stories today. I got two stories for you, actually. We are going to talk about quality metrics through continuous integration and continuous delivery. We're also going to talk about building shelves. How many people have done anything with construction before? 1, 2, 3. Okay, good. So my dad, growing up, always taught me to measure twice, cut once. Seems familiar, right? Measure twice, cut once. You know, I got my computer science degree. I started in engineering, writing software. And it was always test a lot, code once, right? Test n times, code once, right? It's a good mantra to live by. A couple of weeks ago, my wife she asked me to build out some shelves in our pantry. And so she wanted 5 shelves, so we could add, like, she likes to can things and, so we could put that stuff on. So I said, okay, I can do that. I can do that in 45 minutes, no big deal, right? So we bought the wood we needed for the shelving and the brackets. And I went home and I measured the wall, made sure I had all the shelves uniform, 5 across the wall. I designed it out. I used my square, pulled out my square, measured it, made sure that everything was square. And then what I started to do was I took my bracket, I held it up. I made sure I found the stud first, right? Held it up, made sure that I put the bracket right where it should be. Took my level, I put 2 brackets up, held them up. My wife helped me level it, right, with a piece of paper, a piece of wood. And then I started to drill the brackets in and took my level again, made sure it was level, took my square, made sure everything was squared off. Then I took a 2x4, laid it on top, made sure that was level, right? So I then took my piece of shelving and I actually measured it, took my square, measured it again, drew my line, cut it, put it up on the shelf, leveled it, drilled it up in, integrated it in, and then I finally put some things on the shelf to make sure it all looked okay. In those steps, I basically did my unit to design, my unit testing, my functional testing, my integration testing, and then my wife helped me do my customer acceptance testing, right? And it's interesting because I built out all the rest of the shelves, and it didn't take me 45 minutes. It actually took me 30 minutes or so to actually cut the wood, right? It took me about 4 hours or 5 hours total to build all the shelves and to do all the testing to make sure that it was level and accurate. The biggest aspect of it was measurement. Every step of the way, I measured. I made sure it was level. I made sure it was square. Because you know what? I didn't want to have to go back and readjust it. Could I have eyeballed it? Sure. And I could have said, it's good enough, right? But as soon as the first can falls off the shelf, I'm in a lot of trouble. So I made sure it was level. I made sure it was right. I made sure it was square. I made sure I used quality tools and quality metrics to test, to make sure that my shelves were done correctly. So every day, you use metrics to test how you're doing things, not just at work, but in how you live your life. And you do them in small incremental steps to make sure that at the end, you have what you want. Now, I do have to say, my wife came back and said, you know, I think we could fit one more shelf in there. And I said, oh, come on. So I had my scope changed on me, so I had to readjust, right? But in all honesty, I spent probably 45 minutes actually doing the work of cutting and actually putting the shelves together. I spent the majority of my time testing to make sure it's correct. And that's where you spend the majority of your time. And by the way, we talk about multiple roles that people play every day. I was the developer, I was the tester, I worked with my customer, my wife, right? I got her feedback. We play multiple roles every day as well. So it's quality and measurement is in every aspect of what we do. I'm going to talk about what we do at Dell EMC. So I work at Dell EMC. Have people heard of Dell before? Right? How about EMC? Yeah? Okay. So those two companies combined about 3 years ago. And I work in their enterprise storage division. And what we try to do is build storage devices. Now, it's embedded software in hardware, and it's very, very complex to test. It's very, very complex to measure. And we're using tools like Vector today to be able to help us accomplish those goals. What we're doing now is we're continuously integrating and continuously testing so that we know at every step of the way what our code coverage is, for example. So when I write some code, I can write a test and understand what my code coverage is as soon as I end up building it. Now, we've had some transition through our organization, and we're beginning to measure. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So, continuously integrating code and continuously testing is a culture. It's a journey. It's not just something that somebody says, hey, I want to, let's just start doing integration continuously, and let's just start continuous testing. It's a journey. It's a culture. It's about the people, not necessarily about the process. I can go and explain to anybody what continuous testing is and continuous integration is. But whether or not they want to jump in and dive in and really understand what it means to them is a whole different story. So it's a culture and it's a journey. A major part of that is measuring success. You have to be able to measure success. Otherwise, you don't know when you're done. What is very interesting is success can be measured in many different ways. So Joe the tester or Sally the tester can say, yeah, you know what, I tested this. Looks good. I mean, are you going to take their word for it? Would you believe them? If you're a developer and you're writing code and you say, yeah, I tested it. It's going to work. It's going to be fine. What confidence do you have in that? It's a lot different if the conversation is, yes, I've tested it. Here are my unit tests, and there's my code coverage. And as a business, you can build that confidence. So tangible measurement of success is critical. You have to have common philosophies. People have to move together in order to have success. You have to be a single team. The Bruins are going to play tonight. So I'm from Boston. The Bruins are going to play tonight. If the Bruins don't act like a single team, they will lose. Period. End of story. Sorry. It's about common philosophies. It's about understanding that everybody is delivering business value. And everybody has to believe in those common philosophies. Whether you're product quality engineers, business management, program management, you want to be able to do things like build confidence through continuous build, delivery, and test. You want to make sure you have reliable and stable baselines of source code. Those philosophies end up shaping the operational vision and strategic goals and processes. At the end of the day, software development is a manufacturing process. It is. You know, I take my shelves example. I built some shelves, but what if I really wanted to operationalize that and do that at a large scale? I'd have to build a manufacturing process. It's the same thing in the software development world. It's a manufacturing process. I build my code, I test my code, I deliver my code. Every commit must have associated testing. You have to ensure that your code is functioning and working. And measurements of success include things like code coverage. What's my code coverage? What's my cyclomatic complexity? How complex is my code to maintain? Because too complex code may work, but if I can't maintain it long term, that's going to cause a lot of problems for me from a sustaining perspective. What are other things like mean time to delivery, commits to defects, et cetera, et cetera? So these are things that organizations worry about. These are things that we're worried about at Dell EMC through our continuous integration lifecycle. Now, how do you facilitate continuous integration and continuous testing with an embedded system, especially a system that's 25 years old? These concepts weren't around 25, 30 years ago. Nobody facilitated continuous testing. It's a niche embedded product that's in all aspects of the industry. People rely on our storage products in finance, in the medical institutions, in the industrial, airlines, processing systems, education. They rely on these storage devices. So it has to be of a high quality product. It has to be. The organization, EMC, it was a first mover at their time. They were one of the first to the market of storage a long time ago, 25, 30 years ago. And their culture was primarily focused on manual testing due to the complexity of the product. Another huge facet to it, though, was that we had much longer lead times. 25 years ago, your lead time to deliver software wasn't monthly or quarterly, it was years. It was a different time. So, how do we begin to facilitate continuous integration and continuous testing in this kind of an organization? Especially when we have we're in a different world. So we're not in a niche market anymore. Storage is a commodity. I can go buy storage anywhere. Why do I want to buy EMC storage? We have high productivity expectations. We have much faster deliverable expectations. We have globalization pressures. We're in a global environment today. We have less available people resources, a much, much larger market competition. Quality and time to market are key elements to success. So the real question that we have to solve is, how do we continuously integrate? How do we continuously test? And how do we measure at every step of the way? And it's really challenging. And it's not, the company isn't the size of us in this room. It's thousands of people worldwide across the entire globe. Russia, China, India, East Coast, West Coast, South America, everywhere. So how do we work together to drive towards this environment? More importantly, how do we measure success at every single step of the way in small, incremental, tangible ways? So we want to start by building that shift left culture. How many people have heard the term shift left? Okay. Shift left is super critical. It's about testing early and often. Constantly. You know, I go back to my shelves. I could have easily taken those shelves, put the brackets up, zip, 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 put them in, put the shelf on. Would have been slightly crooked. Maybe I would have had to gone back, pulled it out a little bit, made some adjustments. But at the end of the day, that takes a lot of time and energy and money. I can't do that with my huge product. I need to have business confidence early on when I'm developing my code. And I need to be able to find bugs as soon as they're introduced, not in 6 months. What if I find a design bug? What if I find out something that's majorly wrong with my design? I don't want to find that in 6 months. I want to find that incredibly early on. So we have to be able to measure and evaluate at the beginning of the software development lifecycle. And what's important here is when I say at the beginning of the software development lifecycle, that's not when you start to code. That's when you start writing your blueprints for what you're going to build. How many people would hire a contractor? Let's say you were going to contract out a house. How many people would hire a contractor if they just said, we're just going to build a house, don't worry about it? Anybody? Anybody, would you want to see the blueprints of the house? You'd want to say, do you have a plan? What does that plan look like? How are you going to construct the house? Makes sense. I can tell you, I wouldn't hire a contractor if they said, don't worry about it, we got it under control. We're going to build it as we go. Oh, okay. That doesn't really give me a lot of confidence. So it starts at the beginning with documentation. Now, it doesn't have to be loads of documentation, but it should be enough that you can convey to anybody that this is how you intend your feature, your system, whatever it might be, your test suite, to work, to function. From there, that's when you move on to your coding, to validate your design and your tests that go along with it. What's really critical is when you are going through your software development lifecycle process, you are creating quantitative, measurable success criteria. I mean, I can't tell you the number of organizations I've been with that have said, we have to have 100% pass percentage, or a 95% plus code coverage percentage. I mean, has anybody ever achieved 95% code coverage? You have? That's fantastic. I see that very rarely. Just like your tests. Or what if I said I need 95% code coverage. And it's going to take me, though, 3 months, because in order to hit that piece of code, I have to redesign my application from a testability perspective. Is that worth it? Right? So tangible, measurable success criteria. You have to identify those metrics of success. Commit to defect ratios, time to delivery, code coverage. It's a manufacturing practice. That's what's critical to remember. Software development is a manufacturing practice. Your organization is building a product to make money, to be profitable. It wants to build the highest quality product it can, but at the end of the day, they want to increase profitability. The higher the quality of the product, the less cost later on they'll have to sustain, which is fantastic to them, to every organization. I understand your points of variance. What are your incoming commits? What are your tests? What are your configurations? You want to do the right tests at the right time against the right equipment. Very, very early on in your software development lifecycle, maybe I don't want to use my hardware. I want to save that hardware for customer acceptance testing. I want to use my mock environment instead and make sure my code is functioning. You want to make sure that you have quality integration strategies, that you have configuration and automation strategies. And at the end of the day, you want to have tools that support your process strategies, metrics, and philosophies. Without tools like Vector, I can't measure success. I can't measure code coverage. For our embedded platform, that's almost impossible for us to do. And up until several years ago, we've been struggling with that. So now we have the ability to measure success. And it's made a huge difference in our business. So you have to change the integration and testing dynamic. So it's about testing the right things at the right times and promoting software as you progress. So we created what we call a promotional model in order to facilitate that. And what we do is we stage our code. And our code or our artifacts won't progress to the next stage unless they meet certain quality criteria. They just won't progress. If it's not working at the smallest incremental level, why would I push it forward? Why would I want to do more testing on something that isn't working in the smallest set of increment? If my unit tests are failing, I'm not going to want to do feature testing on it. Why would I? That's a waste of my time and resources. So we promote code. Documentation reviews, we call those copper. We have automated pre- and post-commit unit testing, on and off arrays. We call that bronze. Silver, gold, platinum, so on and so forth. At the end of the day, it's unit testing, feature testing, integration testing, customer acceptance testing. We just wrapped it in a nice marketing package, right, for people to consume and understand. Because if you can believe it, we have people in our environment who don't know what unit testing is. They didn't grow up in those terms, with those terms. They know how to do manual customer testing. So when I'm talking to somebody about functional testing, they don't understand what that means. So we have to educate them. And we have to make things tangible for them and wrap things in terms that everybody can consume and understand. And we promote code as we progress. Sometimes we don't promote code because the feature isn't working. If the feature isn't working, why am I going to do more testing on it? I haven't completed the testing that I have to do at the, say, the feature level or the functional level. It saves us time, money, and a significant amount of energy. We do it on top of a consistent DevOps platform. We use tools like GitHub, Jenkins, Artifactory, Vector. We have some homegrown tools in there. And we use tools like Tableau as well for reporting. And it's consistent. Regardless of the product group, regardless of the type of code, we follow this type of model. So what do we do with all of our manual testers? It's a good question. Well, automated testing and automated integration is key to the continuous integration strategy. It can focus in on core and functional feature integration testing, but what about those customer acceptance tests? What about the people that really understand how the product is going to be set up and used? That is priceless. Those people are priceless. You want those people to be able to test how a customer is going to use your product. You can't really automate that. I can't test all of the nuances from an automation perspective and all of the potential ad hoc things that could happen without major investments in things like artificial intelligence. I can use my manual testers to focus in on those facets of testing in my continuous integration environment. Those folks are priceless to an organization like mine. So what do you measure? We measure design proofs, time to delivery, commits, code coverage, cycle time of a commit, pass failure percentages per feature. Those are all of the landscapes and metrics that we want to measure when we're going through our continuous integration process. And finally, when we put it all together, you start with what you want to build. You write a small piece of code, you write an automated test, you run that against a small configuration. We call that bronze. We go to silver. More code, more automated tests, even more code, more complex configurations, more customer focused, and then we measure every aspect of that. Thank you very much. I apologize for going a few minutes over. Thank you. No time for questions. All right, thank you guys.
I think you should take some questions.
Okay, are there any questions? Yeah, please.
So you were talking about the issues you were having when you were testing in So you were talking about issues you were having or the issues that you can encounter when you're testing in an embedded product specifically. So I'm wondering, how did you manage or work on the trade-offs between testing and creating, say, as you were talking about, mocking infrastructure versus testing on your real hardware, especially as it relates to when you're doing software and feature development for hardware that doesn't exist currently?
That's a great question. So what we try to do there is build mocks where it makes sense, right? So major aspects of our code are the real intellectual property of our environment, right? And it would take us years to mimic that, right? So we understand that there's risk when we talk about unit testing, say, against the mock environment, right? So in certain parts of our environment, we don't mock it, because in order to build it, it would take us years and years and years of work that really have not the highest return, right? So you have to be able to measure and understand the risk versus the reward there. In a situation where the hardware doesn't exist, you have to as a business perspective, decide where to invest. Do you invest in mock framework to help further down the line and mock out that hardware that doesn't exist? Or do you just drive forward and take that risk? And it's all about that risk versus that reward. And we continuously go through that trade-off all the time. Other questions? Yeah. Oh, hold on 1 second. Wait till she gives you that.
So I assume you're getting code coverage off target and on target.
Sure.
Are you using vector for both?
We
Or
are.
using different tools for
No. So we use vector for all of our code coverage targets. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to get your perspective on something.
Sure.
Why this happens? You mentioned this software development as a construction industry.
Yeah.
But I feel we take this industry too lightly. So if you make a mistake during a house while making its basement, you cannot afford it.
Right.
Because it will be very expensive to rebuild it.
Right.
But in software, especially consumer-facing software, we see these new releases coming out every month.
Yep.
And this is a sign of rather bad quality. Like, why would a Apple Watch give me a new operating system every couple of months, 10.5.2, 3, 4, 5? What is the reason for this? Is it that they do not test enough? Is it that the requirements keep changing? Why does it happen?
It's a good question. So it really comes back to consumption model, right? Their customers are it's a great question. Their customers are driving the need for that continuous delivery, right? It doesn't necessarily have to do with poor quality, depending on your perspective, right? But it's about delivery to the customer and the bargaining power of your consumers, right? If consumers are saying, we want bug fixes on a continuous basis, or we want more features on a continuous basis, your organizations will drive towards that. And that's what we've seen a lot, especially in the app market or the mobile device market, even in most software markets. Think about software as a service, right? All of the software as a service that we use today, they're constantly being updated in the background, and we don't really even know it, right? Because we've got things like microservice architectures that totally alleviate any sort of downtime, right? So things are constantly changing behind the scenes, not because it's bad quality, right? I wouldn't say it in that way. It's much more so because we have a market that is driving us to deliver with those kinds of timelines. So there's a need for it. There's a want for it. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Hi. You had mentioned how do we facilitate continuous integration and development for embedded systems that are more than 20 years old?
Yeah.
I work in a group where that's true. I guess focus is the human question, where a lot of my coworkers are people that grew up, I guess, or grew up in this development space where you have a niche assumption, you have a niche product assumption, and you said, that's not true anymore.
Right.
We are in this automation, we are in this manufacturing assumption now. We're not special.
Right.
In a sense, you are providing a commodity.
Yeah.
And you have to. So the mindset, the culture changed from that for them. I guess in your experience, you have some individuals who have inherited these very complex code bases, and they're used to just saying, well, I tested it, it's good enough. and then you have a lot of users plucking at it in weird ways, and it's falling apart. In your experience, what do you do with these people?
Yes.
How do you break them back down into unit responsibilities, or how? I guess what change do you do to address the fact that they're spouting a lot of things that aren't true? They're working on a lot of assumptions that are no longer true.
Yeah.
And it's hurting the team.
Yeah.
What has been your experience in that space?
It's a good question. So the biggest, the most important thing, it comes back to, it's the us conversation, right? So we're a single team. It's about us, right? Taking the experience of those individuals and incorporating them into the team, and not shutting down their ideas because they are from a different time, but figuring out how those concepts and ideas can help facilitate and improve how we do business today. You know, the people with the experience aren't necessarily, the people with the experience and lots of experience, just because they did things differently years ago doesn't mean that we can't leverage that experience to improve how we do business today. So changing that conversation to an us conversation is really, really critical.
So one of the things that we have been hearing is the code coverage and testing, development by testing, and especially from the automotive background that I come from. And the risk that we pose with that approach is swinging the pendulum too much to the right, where now we are driven by the matrices and the qualitative aspects, the design, the beauty, the algorithm, the intuitive nature of human design element. Yeah. So where do you think the balance, striking the balance between the qualitative aspect of the software, that probably difficult to measure, but at the same time, at a design level, you can feel it's a better software development. So by focusing a developer's perspective on automation testing, and especially the numerical portion of that whole equation, are we risking the compromise on the design quality itself? And how do we strike a balance in terms of achieving the matrices in terms of a quantity number, at the same time keeping that sublime or a little bit intangible quality to the software itself?
Yeah, so that's another great question. So I think that comes back to really hiding the complexity, right? And this is where you really get into that understanding empathy and understanding what the customer is looking for. So I can write extremely complex code and test it and make sure it works. The end user is never going to see that, or at least they should never see that, right? And that's where we have really two different paradigms when it comes to quality. And the usability aspects of any kind of software, it's very subjective. Right, some people you take out your iPhone, and some people love the iPhone. Some people can't stand the iPhone because they don't like the usability of it. Right, they'd much rather use the Samsung or some other device. However, the complexity of all of the operating system and all their facets is all hidden underneath the covers. The fact is we know that works through quality metrics like code coverage. The other aspect to that, though, which is a whole different paradigm, is usability testing, understanding how customers are going to use the product, what they're looking for, and empathizing with the customers. Does that make sense? Other questions? Sorry. Maybe we can talk later. Okay. Sorry, guys. All right. Thank you very much.